So in this video, I'll be going over all of the standard English conventions questions in the Khan Academy's website, advanced level. And that's going to include both the ones that they categorize as form, structure, and sense, as well as the boundaries questions. And boundaries questions would be ones like that and that. So all of these are grouped together in this PDF and this video. So number one, in 2015, a team led by these scientists succeeded in reducing the coefficient of friction between two surfaces to the lowest possible level, superlubricity. So superlubricity is the lowest possible level of friction between two surfaces. A nearly frictionless state, blank. Okay, so this is a dangling modifier question, and we can tell that for a couple of different reasons. One of them is that we've got a modifier that opens the sentence, and then a comma, and then a blank. Okay, so that's one thing you'll always see with these dangling modifier questions. The other thing is you have pretty long answer choices that have very different word orders, and in particular they have different nouns at the beginning. So what you want to do when you see a dangling modifier question is basically turn that modifier into a question. In other words, like in this case, we want to ask, what is it? What is this describing? What is a nearly frictionless state? The answer to that question is going to tell us what noun needs to come first. So what is a nearly frictionless state? Is it reaching superlubricity? No. That's not a state. That's more like an action, reaching that. Is it two surfaces? Nope. Is it when their surfaces drop? No. Or when their COF drops? No. It is that. What is a nearly frictionless state? Superlubricity. So that's how we end up with a correctly placed modifier, or a subject that is in the correct place relative to the modifier. It's not dangling, it is attached. So the modifier is attached to the thing that it's modifying. That is that. And then this one is going to be another dangling modifier question. Planes are out today. In the canon of North African literature, Moroccan author so-and-so's novel looms large. A coming-of-age story, a social meditation, and a sober gaze into the dark maw of French colonialism, blank interrogates systemic power with memorable intensity. Okay, so that's a complex modifier in that it is a listing of, it's several items at once, but that's okay. We're just going to simplify this. What is a coming-of-age story? Well, it is this novel. And what they've done here is insert another modifier, an interruption, and a positive after it, but that's okay, because we're going to see that the others are going to have the wrong nouns in this slot. It's not Traby, if that's how you pronounce it, himself. He's not a coming-of-age story. He wrote one. His novel is one. It's not Morocco that's a coming-of-age story. And again, it's not Traby. Okay, so that is going to be our correct answer. His novel is a coming-of-age story. Something different here. The animal, and really here the first sentence is not necessary, because the second sentence is really all we need. The animal, which lays eggs but also nurses its young with milk, has since been classified as belonging to the monotremes group. Okay, so we can tell that we have a singular as opposed to a plural. So they and their and them are always plural when we encounter them on this test. And then the difference between its and its, well, that means it is. This is the possessive form of it, and that is why we want it to be our answer. Okay, now this one we can tell by looking at the answer choices that it is testing plurals, possessives, apostrophes, that sort of thing. And so he marveled at the customs of local populations. Okay, so customs is plural, but not possessive. Right? There's nothing that is possessing, and so we don't want any apostrophes in that word. And then what about populations? Well, populations is also plural but not possessive. They could have written this differently. They could have said local populations customs, and that would have been fine. But I think this is better. But in any event, they're not going to give you two equivalent or roughly equivalent options. The thing is that that's not possessive the way it is written here, and so we just go with A, and that is that. This one we can see from looking at the answer choices that it's going to have something to do with verbs, either subject-verb agreement or verb tense, or some combination. So her exhaustive chromosomal study or survey of plants in Silent Valley, a pristine tropical forest in Kerala, India, that is home to nearly 1,000 species of native flora, many of which are endangered. Okay, so what we're going to do here is cross out all of this. Not to be rude or anything, but this is not essential to figuring out the correct verb tense or subject-verb agreement. And then the next thing we're going to do is to cross out in Silent Valley and of plants. And then if we really want to get down to the bottom of things in terms of the actual subject, we're going to cross out exhaustive and chromosomal because those are adjectives essentially here. So her survey was instrumental. So this is very typical of how they're going to set up these questions. Subject-verb agreement, you're going to have your subject probably followed by some prepositional phrases and or interruptions. That's a very complex interruption with maybe an interruption within the interruption, a parenthetical within it. But that's okay. We just get rid of all that. Her survey was instrumental. And as we notice here, our correct answer is singular, and all three of the incorrect answers are plural. And that is quite often going to be what you see on subject-verb agreement questions. I mean, it could be the other way around, plural, singular, singular, singular. But usually the odd one out is correct. 10 of William Shakespeare's plays are classified as histories, although each one of these plays, and this is almost identical to the previous one, in that we've got an interruption, we've got a prepositional phrase, that prepositional phrase ends with a plural, our actual subject is a singular, so each one focuses, and again, singular, plural, plural, plural. I know you might look at B and say, well, that doesn't look plural. Remember, plural verbs, or verbs that pair with plural nouns, don't have the extra, don't have added S's, I play, he plays, they play. Okay, yeah. He focuses, they focus. This one, on the other hand, it also deals with verbs, but in a different way. This is not going to be subject-verb agreement. So with the questions like this, we need to read really carefully, but we don't need to read the first sentence because that's not going to... I guess it could potentially tell us something about the tense, but we're going to see how far we can get with just the second sentence. Okay, these spherical bits of glass form when asteroids collide with the planet, ejecting bits of molten rock into the atmosphere that, after cooling and solidifying into glass, blank back onto Mars' surface. Okay, so you might already know what the answer is, but I'm just going to go ahead and say we're going to simplify things by crossing out the interruption. We're going to cross out prepositional phrases, so into the atmosphere of molten rock of glass. And that's enough. Okay, we don't have to cross out everything. These bits form when asteroids collide, ejecting bits that rain back onto Mars's surface. So I think it would be very tempting to pick A here if you didn't read it carefully. And just, oftentimes a sentence is going to end with a participle phrase like raining back onto Mars' surface when you have a comma there. But in this case, nope, it's ejecting bits that rain back onto Mars' surface. With some 16,000 in attendance, the Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and blank, or Festac 77, should go that way, as the event was more commonly known, became the largest Pan-African event, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so here we're going to cross out the second sentence because that is not going to be necessary or even relevant in terms of figuring out our correct punctuation. So I'm trying to cross it out, just like, okay, that's excessive probably. That's excessive, but we can't see it now. It's not going to distract us. And then we're also going to cross out this, but not as thoroughly. Okay. The Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and blank. Festival of Arts. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is figure out the interruption, where to place the interruption, or where the interruption begins and ends. And as we see here, we have a dash there. If we were just going to have a single dash, that would mean that the portion leading up to the dash would need to be able to stand on its own as a complete sentence. And that's not going to work here. The Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and blank, as the event was more commonly known. What we want here is the dash. We want the dash. I was saying. Okay. So, the Second World Black and African Festival of Arts and Culture, dash, or Festac 77, as the event was more commonly known, became the largest Pan-African blah, blah, blah. So, this is the gist of our sentence. This festival became. And that is that. Okay. This is another boundaries question. So we have to read carefully, paying attention to what constitutes independent clauses, dependent clauses, etc. So the field of geological oceanography owes much to, this is not a boundaries question. It owes much to American geologist Marie Tharp. Okay, so no punctuation needed here. No punctuation needed. American geologist Marie Tharp. Why no punctuation? It's not saying the, the best known American geologist. It's not saying that, or my favorite American geologist. It's just saying American geologist. And when you have something like that, painter Pablo Picasso, writer Mark Twain, author Mark Twain, etc., etc., there's no place for a comma there. It's only when you're going to list something, state something specific like the best known American geologist, Marie Tharp, or my favorite American geologist, Marie Tharp. Don't know who Marie Tharp is, but just hypothetically, those would require a pair of commas, but we don't have that here, so we just go with A. Researcher Lynn Z developed a process for increasing the tensile strength of silkworm blank blank, dissolving and reweaving the silk. Okay, so what we're going to do here... we need to read the whole thing. And that's the key on these questions, because it would have been very tempting to pick B. Researcher Lynn Z developed a process for increasing the tensile strength of silkworm silk by dissolving and so it could work to say by silk, but the problem is, as we keep reading, we see that we eventually have another independent clause. Z increased the amount. Okay, so that's an independent clause, meaning we can't just join it to what comes before with a comma. We would have a run-on sentence if we did that. We need some kind of full stop, whether that's a period or a semicolon. Here it'll be a period, in order to avoid a run-on sentence. So what we're going to have is this, and I might need to go back and fix this in my answer key because I might have put the wrong answer. So I will make sure to do that. Researcher Lynn Z developed a process, blah, blah, blah. That's not essential. This researcher developed a process. By doing this other stuff, she increased the amount. So our answer there is going to be D. 10 is D, not B. In discussing Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, blah, 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 literary theorist so-and-so directs the reader's attention to the character of Margaret Saville. As Spivak points out, Saville is not the protagonist of Shelley's blank. Blah, 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 blah. She's the occasion of it. So as in the previous one, we've got an independent clause here at the end. We have an independent clause here as well. We can't just join them with a comma, let alone no punctuation. We need a full stop, period, or semicolon. Here it's going to be a semicolon. Saville is not the protagonist of Shelley's blank, of Shelley's novel. Rather, as the recipient of the letters that frame the book's narrative, she's the occasion of it. Okay, so that is that. So with a semicolon, you can join two independent clauses, whether that means whether you're doing so without a conjunction at all, or whether you have a conjunctive adverb, conjunctive transitional adverb, rather, however, nevertheless, therefore, etc. So the video I made entitled "A Couple of Tricky However Questions," which I'll try to link to, that applies the same way to words like rather, nevertheless, therefore, etc. You can't just join two independent clauses with a comma followed by one of these words and another comma. You need a semicolon or a period in front of it. And this is going to be very similar. Using satellite remote sensing, this doctor gathers important data on crop health. She doesn't just compile the data, though. She also shares her findings with African farmers. So here we have an independent clause, and then a second independent clause, and then a participle phrase there, blah, 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 enabling them. We don't need to worry about that. Okay, so she doesn't just compile the data, though. So the contrast that the word though is communicating, that contrast is between the first sentence and this green portion. That might not look green, but it's supposed to be green pen. Okay, that's the contrast. So we want the word though to be part of that first clause. They could have. You can't start a sentence with though in the same way that you can with however. But if they had used however, they could have said this: however, Nakalimbe doesn't just compile the data, semicolon. She also shares her findings, etc. We don't have however, we have though, but the idea is the same. She doesn't just compile the data, though. Okay, so we can say we can eliminate A and D because they lack a semicolon altogether. And then B would change the meaning. It would say something like this: though she doesn't just compile the data, pause, though she also shares her findings, blah, 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 it would yield a fragment in that yellow portion, and we don't want that. So our answer is going to be C. In paleontology, the term Elvis taxon gets applied to a newly identified living species that was once presumed to be extinct. Like an Elvis impersonator who might bear a striking resemblance to the late musical icon Elvis Presley himself, an Elvis taxon is not the real thing. Eventually we're going to have an it. It is a misidentified lookalike. So yet again, we have an independent clause at the end of the sentence if we include the it. Okay, it is a misidentified lookalike. So, given that we have an independent clause before that as well, an Elvis taxon is not the real thing, that means we need something more than just a comma. We need either a period or a semicolon, and that's the only one that gives it to us. So, could you have used a semicolon here? Yes. I think a semicolon would have been really good here. But the thing is, the semicolon and the period are equivalent for these purposes, so you're never going to have to choose between them. You just look for the answer choice that has one of them and hopefully nothing else wrong. Here, there's only one of them that exists, so it's going to have to be D. They could have said it is not the real thing, comma, but a misidentified lookalike. That would have worked, but not C, because C is giving us a second subject here, it, and that would yield a run-on sentence. 14. Quantum particles of light, or photons, provide an unhackable, a means of transmitting encryption keys over networks that cannot be hacked. Okay, they provide an unhackable means of transmitting encryption keys over networks, as attempts to observe particles in quantum states will inevitably alter the particles and, in the process, dismantle any information they transmit. So here, in the process is a kind of interruption. So these attempts will invariably alter the particles and dismantle any information they transmit. So the attempts, that's our subject, and we have a compound predicate, I guess you'd call that. We have two different verbs, 1 and 2. Attempts will alter and dismantle. So we take this and we surround it or enclose it with identical punctuation marks. Okay, I want a wider pen width. Okay. In 1994, almost 200 years after the death of Wang Zhenyi, I don't know how to pronounce that, the International Astronomical Blank, the contributions of the barrier-breaking 18th century astronomer and author of Dispute of the Precession of the Equinoxes, naming a crater after her. Okay, so we don't need that. We don't need that. We need to figure out the verb form. Okay. Almost 200 years after the death of this person, the International Astronomical Union. Okay. I would have gone with just finally acknowledged. Finally acknowledged. That would be the simple past tense. The correct answer here is going to be answer choice C. What are they doing here? I think this is a little bit odd, but what this is something called future in the past, or would can be used in different ways. It can be used as a conditional, like I would go to the store, but my car is broken. My car is in the shop. Okay, but here it is not being used that way. It's being used as the what is it? The past tense of will. it's a little bit strange that they're doing this, because in 1994, that's in the past relative to now. But I think the idea is this. So let's say that if it's almost 200 years, let's say that in the year 1800, Wang Xinyi dies. Okay. If we were, okay, that's in the past, for sure. Relative to that point in the past, 1994, gets an award or has a crater named after her. Okay, this is in the future relative to this point in the past. So 200 years later, she would be recognized, or they would recognize her. So in 1800, Wang Xinmi might have said, someday the International Astronomical Union will name a crater on Venus after me. I'm kind of being facetious here. She's not going to predict that, but that's in the future. Someday they will do that. But if we're talking about this point, like, God, this is challenging to articulate. They would finally acknowledge it. She's saying that they will do it, but we're talking about the future, something that was in the future relative to this point in the past. Boy, this was not the best explanation. Someday they will name a crater after me. 200 years later, they would name a crater after her. So that's not very common on the SAT, but obviously if they're going to ask about it here, they can test on it. With this one, we're back to the dangling modifier issue. And again, we can see that because we've got long answer choices that have different word orders that start out with different subjects. And so what we want to do is to take the modifier and turn it into a question. What fortifies soil against erosion? What fortifies soil in arid ecosystems against erosion? Not a recent study. A study can't really fortify soil. An estimated 60% reduction can't fortify soil, and a recent study's estimate can't fortify soil. These crusts are what fortify soil. Okay, crusts. Crust. Okay, like maybe like a pie crust fortifies a pie. It keeps the pie filling from spilling all over the place. Likewise, biocrust evidently fortifies soil. Here we're back to something to do with verbs, and looking at the answer choices, we might be able to anticipate that this is going to have more to do with verb tense. And the reason for that is that there's not going to be any agreement issues on these. What do I mean? Well, let's just look at it. A second-generation Japanese-American, W.M. blank in World War II and won 2 amateur national basketball championships when he joined the New York Knicks. Okay, so he joined the New York Knicks. New York Knicks in 1947. From 1941 to 1945, he served in World War II. Okay. It is currently 2023, so that's our perspective. Maybe this was written in 2022, but the point is, recently. Okay, so this is in the past, 1947, but this is even further in the past. So this would be a scenario in which we would use the past perfect. So he had already served in World War II when he joined the Knicks. So this is in the past. This is not grammatical. The past. It's in the past relative to some other thing that happened in the past, and that's when we would use the past perfect. And something to note here is that had it's the same auxiliary verb that you would use if you had a plural. They had served, he had served, we had served, you had served, I had served, it had served. Doesn't matter. Whereas if we were in the present perfect, he has served, they have served, I have served, we have served, you have served, it has served. So it varies when you're in the present tense, but not in the past tense and not in the future tense. They will have served, I will have served, she will have served, etc. So that is that, but the past perfect. 18, the artistic talents. And so another verb question, but this one is going to be subject-verb agreement. Again, it's quite a bit like the previous ones that we saw, having to do with subject-verb agreement, in that we've got an interruption, we've got a prepositional phrase, we really want to make sure we identify the subject, talents. The talents aren't limited. So again, another thing that's similar about this one to the previous ones, previous subject-verb agreement questions, is our correct answer goes one way, it's plural. The incorrect answers go the other way, they're singular. So the talents aren't limited. And then I think this is the last one. Yes. In a 2016 study, so-and-so found that there was one personality trait that they scored high on. That's not great. I would have said that the College Board wouldn't. I don't know if the College Board wrote this question. There was one personality trait on which they scored particularly high. That they scored particularly high on seems sloppy, but whatever. That's not what they're testing on here. What they're testing on here is this. We've got a setup, and then we have a payoff or a punchline. Okay, and so that is a scenario in which we would want to use a colon. Possibly a dash, but generally a colon. Okay, and the thing about the setup is that it needs to be an independent clause, but the payoff can be, and here I'm going to be a little more precise than I've been in the past, the payoff can be an independent clause or it can be a phrase. I was sloppy in the past and I would write independent clause or dependent clause, but the thing is, you generally wouldn't have a dependent clause. Another way I could have put this was independent clause or not, meaning it could be an independent clause, it doesn't have to be. But something can not be an independent clause and also not be a dependent clause. It can just be a phrase. And so that's what we'd want here, openness to experience. And so whether we can't have a semicolon that's just followed by a phrase. It would need to be followed by an actual independent clause. And so that is that. So kind of a longer video here relative to these other Khan Academy videos, but hope this was helpful, and we'll try to keep cranking these out.